The trip to Tatooine was swift and problem-free. They were able to pick up Anakin and get him and Ahsoka transferred over to their ship with little issue. As soon as they were in orbit, the 501s received orders to head to the Bith system, while the 212th would be running supply convoy escort through the brand-new hyperlanes they had just gotten access to. Cody and Rex had said their goodbyes, sending the good captain on his way with his men, general and new commander. Kaz had been sad to see him go, and a little upset that he had slept through their departure, but Cody had promised to include him on their weekly holocalls, which had appeased him. After breakfast, the crew of the ship had been given a free day, with rotations set up for the skeleton crew so they also could get a chance to rest. While they weren't able to set down on a planet for some genuine shore leave, Obi-Wan and Cody were still able to at least do something to help the men relax. Leave en route was better than no leave at all. Obi-Wan took advantage of the morning quiet to meditate, get the last dregs of his holdover paperwork completed, and then set about finding materials to make beads from. Waxer and Boyle had become an invaluable resource for this, as they were part of the trooper procurement ring, the source of the small, non-uniform items that the troopers tended to collect through various means, and they were able to find 3 wooden beads that could be painted to suit the occasion. Obi-Wan had gladly traded them a small sum of credits from his stipend as compensation. After getting the paint from the quartermaster, Obi-Wan set to work, knowing he needed to hurry before Kaz was done with the ship tour that Cody had organized as a suitable distraction. The colors Obi-Wan chose for the beads were simple. Green and red for the beads symbolizing Kaz's apprenticeship, brown with a gold stripe for his efforts in battle on Christophsis and against Ventress, and finally, orange for the Sons of Tatooine to commemorate their first mission. If Kaz or Cody perhaps noticed that he chose some of the colors after Mandalorian color traditions, well, then all the better for it. Arts and crafts project done for the day, Obi-Wan stashed the beads in his belt pocket and went looking for his apprentice. A quick comm message to Cody confirmed the part of the ship they were in, so he headed down that way, taking his time and meandering through the halls, chatting idly with some of the men he encountered about this or that. Everyone unanimously seemed to be enjoying their downtime, even if some of them preferred cleaning and repairing their armor or running training drills for fun to playing games in the rec room or wasting time on the holonet. Some of the men, Obi-Wan had noticed, greatly enjoyed those more military-oriented activities, while others preferred to find different means of occupying their time. Today, they had the freedom to do what they wished. Obi-Wan knew there was a contingent in the rec room already causing mischief. His trip to the onboard training room was pleasant, and when the door hissed open to allow him entry, Obi-Wan was greeted to a hilarious sight. Kaz was stood in the middle of the padded section of the room used for hand-to-hand training, and Ghost Company, including Commander Cody and Captain Helix, were there, arrayed around the mats. Except for, of course, Waxer and Boyle, who were floating above the mats, suspended in the air by Kaz's efforts with the Force. Clearly, his apprentice had gotten distracted from his tour. The assembled troopers had not noticed him yet, too busy heckling and catcalling their fellow men who were shakily hovering above the floor. As Obi-Wan watched, Boyle started to do a slow cartwheel, which caused them all to carry on even louder. Laughter bubbling up in his chest, Obi-Wan wandered over as silently as he could. Cody was right on the edge of the map behind Kaz, and next to him, as usual during training runs, was Helix. The medic's eyes were fixed on Waxer and Boyle, but he hadn't made a move to interfere yet. "Hey, Vodika, spin me!" Waxer called, waving his arms around in the air as if that would help him start turning. "Yeah, hang on," Kaz mumbled slowly, arms outstretched, a look of intense concentration on his face. He closed his eyes, head tilting downward slightly, and started to rotate his left hand. Waxer began to spin, and Boyle stopped, hanging upside down. This caused Waxer to waggle his arms even more. "Yeah, there you go, Waxer!" Boyle crossed his arms over his chest and glared at Waxer, but the effect was ruined by the sheer fact that he was upside down. "You distracted him, and now I'm upside down. Oh, boo-hoo for you," Waxer cackled. "Think of it as endurance training, Vod." "Harchak, Waxer," Boyle hissed, face starting to turn red. Both Helix and Cody seemed to think this funny if their wide smiles and barely suppressed laughter were anything to go by, and they did nothing to intervene. He took that moment to enjoy the sight of Cody letting himself relax and loosen up a little, drawn in by his smile, the sparkle in his amber eyes, and the way his Force presence was glowing happily in contentment. Truly, it did Obi-Wan's own mood good to see Cody in such a way. Obi-Wan smirked, hiding behind the troopers in the back, and waved his fingers, calling lightly on the Force, and tilted Boyle upright and set him down on his feet. "Oh, hey." Boyle patted himself down and shook his head. He looked over his shoulder at Kaz. "Thanks, kid." Kaz's eyes snapped open, concentration lost, and Waxer fell to the floor with a soft thud and a startled exclamation, causing another round of loud laughter. Huh? Kaz's eyes narrowed and he looked around, then grinned. Hey, Master! General! Waxer yelped, scrambling back to his feet. The men parted to make room for Obi-Wan to squeeze through them. Most of them were in various pieces of their armor and blacks. The only ones who had the full kit on minus helmets were Kaz and Cody. Amazingly, the men did not immediately jump to attention like they would have before, and Obi-Wan let himself feel a small wave of happiness at this. His insistence that they were all off duty appeared to have gotten through. Waxer was dusting himself off and giving Obi-Wan a look that was equal parts wary and sheepish. Relax, Waxer, Obi-Wan said with a friendly smile. He turned to Kaz and gave him a raised eyebrow look. Having fun, Padawan? I was training, Kaz said with a bright grin. Right, Cody. Cody blew out a long sigh and shook his head, the dregs of his smile from before still tugging at the corners of his lips. Right. He stood a little straighter and addressed Obi-Wan. Kaz wanted to practice, and Longshot had the bright idea to start lifting up brothers. I called Helix to make sure nothing got out of hand, sir. It's quite all right. It is good practice, if difficult, Obi-Wan said, giving both of them a quick smile. He crossed his left arm over his chest, right elbow propped on it and his hand gesturing lightly in the air. How many Vo did you manage to levitate at once? Just 2, Kaz said, rubbing the back of his neck. It was hard. I could feel their muscles and movements pushing back at me. I dropped Chris the first few times. Yes, picking up living things is much harder than inanimate objects. Obi-Wan shook his head and gave Kaz a wry look. Perhaps you should have started with smaller, less twitchy objects, Padawan. This was way more fun, though. I'm sure. It really was, sir, Longshot said as he wandered up to them. The assorted gathering of troopers had dispersed to find their own entertainment once they realized no more fun was to be had. You just liked watching Chris get dropped on his sheds repeatedly, Helix shot back with a smirk, arms crossed over his chest and medic bag slung casually over his left shoulder. Yeah, that was a definite perk. Longshot's smirk widened. Hey, Chris yelped, punching his bot in the shoulder, making it Longshot's turn to flinch. Ow! I was the one that got stuck upside down. Boyle butted in, forearm resting on Waxer's shoulder and legs crossed at the ankles. Thanks for the save, General. Of course, Boyle. I assume you finished your project, sir? Cody said, derailing any further bickering. Ah, yes, quite, Obi-Wan replied. Project? What project? Kaz gave his master a curious look. The one we need to go back to my quarters for, Cody said, shifting just a hair from foot to foot, his fingers twitching against his thighs like he wanted to curl them but was resisting, and his spine a little straighter than usual. Oh, I know what this is, Helix said teasingly, smirking at Kaz. What? Kaz crossed his arms and gave the medic a narrowed-eyed look. How do you know what it is and I don't? I told you yesterday, Cody said with a laugh, turning and walking towards the door at the end of the room, the others following after him quickly. You did? This just caused Kaz's frown to deepen as he trotted after Cody, Obi-Wan following behind them. Yeah, he definitely did, Waxer said, joining Helix in the game, sharing a conspiratorial wink with the medic and following them out with Boyle. Chris and Longshot had elected to stay, already squaring up on the mats for a quick spar. Yeah, I don't know either, kid, Boyle said in commiseration. I clearly was not there for this discussion. No, you weren't, Helix confirmed and then smirked. Neither was I. He pointed to the back of Kaz's head. He was, though. Wait, Kaz stopped dead just outside the door, causing Helix to nearly slam into him. He looked up at the commander, eyes shining. Painting? Cody's lips twitched with his not inconsiderable effort to keep from smiling. It might be. Oh, ho, ho, Helix said, nudging them all out into the hallway properly. Vodika finally earned his colors. Guess he isn't a shiny anymore, Waxer said, clapping a hand down on Kaz's shoulder and giving it a quick shake. Congrats, kid. You earned it. Good job, Kaz, Boyle said, ruffling his hair. Kaz laughed and swatted at his hand. Waxer's right, you earned it. I heard you went toe-to-toe with Ventress and lived to tell about it. That's practically a rite of passage in the 212th. Up next, General Clanker, Waxer said with a teasing grin. Don't even joke about that, Lieutenant, Cody said, slightly harsher than he intended. Cody nearly had a heart attack about Ventress yesterday, Helix said with an exaggerated eye roll. Please don't make it worse. I did not. You so did. Implying you weren't right there with me, Helix. I was perfectly. Gentlemen, Obi-Wan interrupted, coughing into his hand. He gave them both a look over the fist he was hiding a smile behind. He turned a sardonic eyebrow over at Cody. "I do believe we have some armor to paint?" "Ah, yes. Yes, we do." Cody collected himself, sending a narrow-eyed look at Helix before turning smartly on his heel and heading towards the lift at the end of the hall, completely ignoring Helix's sniggering as he did. "See you later, Helix. Wax or boil." Kaz waved goodbye before sprinting after Cody, his much shorter legs having to pump faster to keep up, Padawan braid bobbing behind his ear. "See you at lunch, Vodka General." Helix gave him a quick two-fingered salute, then headed back down the hall in the direction of the rec room, checking his comb for messages as he went. He stopped, then turned, shouting down the hallway at their retreating backs. "I want pictures." Yeah, Cody called back, waving a dismissive hand over his shoulder. They stepped into the lift, Kaz between them, and the cadet was practically vibrating in place. He was shifting from foot to foot, hands idly fiddling with his blaster clip and lightsaber, looking back and forth from Cody to Obi-Wan and grinning from ear to ear. He kept checking the glowing numbers above the door to see what floor they were on. Obi-Wan and Cody shared a smirk above Kaz's head. The Force was filled with anticipatory excitement. When the doors opened, Kaz nearly sprinted out, just barely stopping from squeezing through the gap. Speed walking with a purpose, he made a beeline for Cody's quarters, booted feet skipping across the polished floor of the negotiator. He stopped in front of Cody's door and turned to look at them, left foot jiggling in impatience, teeth gnawing on his bottom lip and hands worrying the clasps of the pouches on his utility belt. "Avad might get the impression that you were eager, Kaz," Cody said as he strolled up to his own room at a deliberately leisurely pace. "I am." Kaz's foot started to jiggle even faster. "Peace, Padawan," Obi-Wan said when they stopped in front of the door. "This is a good moment to practice releasing that out into the Force, Smoo." Kaz's eyes narrowed at Obi-Wan, and he flicked his gaze over to Cody, but when Cody didn't open the door, he sighed, closed his eyes, took in a deep breath, and called on the Force. For a moment, his hands and foot seemed to work faster. Then abruptly, the tension bled out of him, his presence in the Force going back to the soothing engine-idle hum it usually was. Underneath the excitement, there had been a sour note of anxiety which had been fueling the twitchy behavior Obi-Wan had sought to curb. "Oh," Kaz breathed out when he opened his eyes. "I didn't even notice that." "That's what I'm here for, Padawan," Obi-Wan said, running a quick, comforting hand through Kaz's hair. "There's no need for anxiety. Now, are you ready?" "Yup," Kaz grinned up at them both, leaning in slightly to Obi-Wan's hand in his hair like he always did. "Let's get started then." Cody reached up and opened the door, leading them inside. Cody had clearly cleaned up beforehand. The desk was spotless and pulled out into the middle of his room. The footlocker and bunk had been pushed all the way to the wall, and arrayed out on the desk were cleaning and painting supplies for plastoid armor. Kaz walked in, eyes wide as he took in the room, noting Cody's personal DC-15A on the shelf above his bed next to the commander's helmet, gleaming in the bright overhead lights. It took the boy a moment to notice, but he spotted a new helmet and goggles sitting in the middle of the desk. This one was smaller, with a short, flat-brim, open face, and was clearly designed for a child rather than an adult. The goggles, too, were more than just pieces of transparent steel. They were slightly tinted, and there were lines around the edges that hinted at some kind of HUD system integrated into them. The helmet was already done with a base coat of white paint, and the goggles were a solid black to match the underarmor that all the troopers used. Cody had clearly gotten someone to make this on the fabricator, and it hadn't been a last-minute project. The craftsmanship looked solid. "Is that a new helmet for me?" Kaz asked quietly as he wandered up to the desk and marveled at said helmet. He turned curious eyes up at Cody for confirmation. "I had the quartermaster start working on it that same day you got here," Cody answered. "Some of his soft-shell staff had stayed aboard the ship when we went down to Christophsis, and when Admiral Yularen took the fleet back for resupply, they grabbed the final materials needed to assemble it all. Your helmet doesn't fit, kid. It's a hazard. And it's got removable liner to expand with you as you grow." "That was very thoughtful of you, Cody," Obi-Wan told him gratefully, smiling gently. He was touched by Cody's thoughtfulness, and that only endeared his commander to him even more, if such a thing were possible. "Well, it's my job to protect him, too," Cody replied, smiling back and sharing in the warm feelings leaking into their bond in the Force. "Thank you," Kaz said, picking up the helmet with reverence, turning it carefully in his hands to examine it. "You put a comm system in it?" "Wizard." "It's keyed into the HUD on the goggles in your Vambrace comm unit. It's not independent. You'll need both for it to receive and transmit. So, it's just a speaker and microphone?" "Not it." "Still dead useful, though," Kaz answered. He set the helmet down with care and scooped up the goggles, holding them to his eyes and smiling when the HUD lit up. "Oh, wow. This is great. He looked over at Cody and laughed. Oh, it displays everyone's numbers like the trooper helmets. And Master Obi-Wan even has his own tag. How'd you do that? Kaz lowered the goggles and gave Cody a confused look. He doesn't have an ident chip. It's linked to his comm unit, so it'll only work if he's got it with him, Cody answered when he received 2 sets of curious looks. You can add General Skywalker and Commander Tano if you want when you see them again. Wizard. Kaz smiled and put his hands on his hips. Well, are we painting? Yes, in a moment, Obi-Wan said, schooling his expression to keep it from shifting around with his nerves. He barely checked the urge to rub his palms on the outside of his legs, knowing that would do nothing with his gloves in the way. What I have for you will go much quicker, so we'll do that first, if that's all right, Cody. Yes, of course, General, Cody said, interest and curiosity sparking behind his eyes. While armor painting would be very special for Kaz and he was excited for it, he'd seen it before. This gifting of Jedi beads was entirely new and fascinating to him, and he would gladly take any opportunity to gain insight into his general. Kaz gasped. The beads! Indeed, Obi-Wan said. Come over here and stand in front of me, Padawan. Kaz did so with alacrity. Out of habit, he slipped into parade rest, feet shoulder-width, arms behind his back, and hands folded right over left. What do I need to do, Master? Nothing but pay close attention, Obi-Wan said easily. You'll have to do this one day when you are a knight with a Padawan of your own. That's a long time from now, Kaz said, amused and skeptical. Yes, quite, Obi-Wan agreed, tone of voice and force presence solemn. Now, I told you before that these are awarded for milestones and great achievements, did I not? Yes, Master. Every morning when you fix your braid, take care to put them back in the order I give them to you. Yes, Master. Reaching into his belt pouch, Obi-Wan pulled out the beads, holding them out for Kaz to see in his palm. The cadet looked at them, eyes wide and intent, memorizing the smallest details about the beads themselves, every imperfection and the traces of Obi-Wan's force signature lingering over them. Then, with his other hand, Obi-Wan summoned the force, undoing Kaz's braid and letting the small elastic tie float idly by the boy's head. Next, he levitated the green and red bead from his hand, floating it delicately in front of Kaz. Hold out your hand, Padawan, Obi-Wan instructed softly. Like Kaz did. Obi-Wan let the small bead drop into Kaz's open palm, giving the cadet a moment to look it over up close, then spoke again. This is for your apprenticeship to me and symbolizes the start of our partnership together. May it always be a reminder to you of that moment. Green and red, Cody whispered from Obi-Wan's side. He gave Obi-Wan a curious look, a bit of hope sparking in his chest. Did you choose the colors to paint these? Obi-Wan's expression went a little smug. I might have, yes. What do they mean? The colors? Kaz asked, eyes still locked on his hand where the bead was resting. Red to honor a parent or leader, green for duty, Cody answered, shaking his head and smirking at Obi-Wan, his delight at this turn of events easy to read in his sparking sunburst force presence. That his general had chosen the colors the way he had only made Cody like him even more. Precisely! Obi-Wan lifted the green and red bead easily with the force, manipulating it in Kaz's hair once again, pulling the braid together and then sliding the bead in between the strands, securing it. He lifted the next one out of his own hand and sent it over to Kaz. Brown for valor and a stripe of gold for the 2000 to signify your acts of courage in your first campaign. Kaz beamed up at Obi-Wan, trying to watch out of the corner of his eye as his hair seemed to weave itself together of its own accord. Thank you, Master. And finally, Obi-Wan began, levitating the russet peach-orange bead over to Kaz's hand. A bead the color of the setting, Tatooine suns, for our first mission together. He let it rest in Kaz's hand for a moment, to allow the cadet to admire it, before lifting that one up as well and adding it to the braid. Finally, Obi-Wan tied it off at the end with the small bit of elastic that Kaz had been using, then lowered his hand, smiling easily at his apprentice. Kaz let his hand fall and Master and Padawan regarded each other steadily, presences mixing and pulling on each other in the Force. Congratulations, Padawan Kaz, on your achievements. May the Force always be with you, and with you, Master Kenobi. As one, they bowed, then straightened. Kaz's face broke out in a delighted grin the moment he was upright, his hand fingering and tugging at the braid before launching himself at Obi-Wan, wrapping his arms around the older Jedi's ribs in a fierce hug. Obi-Wan let out an oomph and a chuckle, arms coming around the cadet's back, left hand drifting up to tug gently at the newly adorned braid, affection for his Padawan bubbling in his chest. Thank you, Master, Kaz mumbled into his master's tunics. Of course. You earned them, Padawan, Obi-Wan answered just as softly. He ran a hand through Kaz's hair, then pushed him gently back by his shoulders. Now, I do believe it's Cody's turn. Yes. Cody jumped into action, shaking himself out of his Obi-Wan-centered contemplation, moving over to the other side of the desk that was now in the middle of the room. Go ahead and take your armor off, kid, and set it here. Alec, Kaz said, reaching for his vambraces first. They came off his forearms easily, as the straps keeping them in place had magnetized clips that were designed to be operated with one hand. Unlike a traditional Mandalorian cute, the blacks the troopers wore did not have the magnet zones woven in to hold Beskar plating in place. The troopers had adapted by adding hook and loop fasteners when needed. The remainder of Kaz's armor quickly became a hastily stacked pile on the desk. The last piece was the cuirass and backplate that were held together by short magnetic clasps and the shoulder straps. Cody reached out and took the pieces, arranging them on the desk in the pattern they would be worn in, hands moving skillfully on muscle memory alone. Helmet, then shoulders, chest and back, arms off to the sides, then finally the thigh plates at the bottom. Picking up a small container of milky liquid, Cody uncapped the jar and grabbed a small, soft cloth that had been sitting next to it. All right, first step, Cody said, curling the cloth into his palm and pointing with a finger. Grab the helmet. We'll do it in order. Got it. Kaz reached out and picked up the helmet, putting one hand inside to balance it on top. He held out his free hand for the cloth, waiting patiently for Cody to dip it in the cleaning solution before passing it over. What do I need to do after cleaning? Plastoid armor doesn't need to be primed, Cody answered easily, watching intently as Kaz cleaned the helmet. He looked over to his left, noticing as General Kenobi wandered over to stand next to him and observe. But after cleaning Beskar, you would want to sand the surface to give it texture to allow the paint to adhere properly. The stuff we use on the plastoid chemically bonds to it, almost like a type of dye. It sinks down into the material, staining it. No need for sanding. I had always wondered how you made that work, Obi-Wan said thoughtfully, arms crossed and a hand at his beard. Surface-level scratches don't show the white underneath. Yeah, you have to gouge it a little deeper to see the plastoid under the paint, Cody answered. He pointed to his left shoulder pauldron, heavily scuffed with the remnants of a blaster hit scoring its surface. This one got hit pretty good. Are you going to paint it today? Kaz asked, looking up from his intense study of his new helmet. Yes, to show you how, Cody said, and as he did, he pulled the scuffed pauldron from his shoulder, the hook and loop fastener under it making a slight ripping noise as he did so. He set it down on the desk in all its banged-up glory. Shortly after, Kaz deposited his now gleaming helmet. Helmet's done. What's next? Shoulder pauldrons? Obi-Wan guessed, eyebrows raised in question. Yup, Cody said. He held out a hand in silent request for the cloth back, and when Kaz handed it to him, he dipped it in the solution, then passed it back. Get to it, kid. Kaz laughed and followed instructions, picking up one pauldron and shining it well before moving on to the next one quickly. When both were shining, he looked back at Cody expectantly. Cuirass! Freshly dipped cloth handed back once again, Kaz set to work. They went through each piece of armor until all of them were as fresh and sparkling as the day they were issued. Kaz and Cody stood on opposite sides of the table, considering the armor arrayed on it like a disassembled mannequin. Kaz crossed his arms over his chest, brows drawn, and lips thinned in concentration as he looked down at his collection of items. All right, Kaz said slowly, looking up and glancing from Cody to Obi-Wan. It's clean, but what pattern should I put on it? That's a good question, Obi-Wan mumbled, stroking his beard idly. His eyes twitched over to Cody. How do the Vode choose their patterns? There's a base pattern for every battalion, Cody answered at length, after he firmly pushed past the shock of pleasure that came from his general asking such a question. So, if you wanted, you could just paint that. Kaz's frown deepened. No, that's... nuh-uh. There's something else. His hands migrated up, squeezing gently at the hair on the top of his head as he stared at the slate-blank pieces of armor on the table. Hesitantly, his eyes flicked up to look at Obi-Wan, and he smiled, and his hands dropped. The Jedi symbol. That needs to go on my pauldron, like Master Obi-Wan, but in gold paint. Well, that's a start, Cody said with a light chuckle. He picked up his own shoulder guard that he had taken off. Carefully, he ran the cleaning cloth across it, then surveyed his work. Deeming it sufficient, he set the cloth and pauldron down and picked up the small pot of paint. Here, I'll show you on mine, and then it's all you, Kazika. Kaz nodded, avidly watching as Cody picked up a paintbrush, dipped in a small amount of paint, and then in even and deliberate strokes, covered the scorch mark on his shoulder guard from their last battle. After a few passes with the brush, it looked as pristine and new as the first day Cody painted it, minus the small divot still in the plastoid from the blaster bolt it had stopped. Cody set it down, then pushed a handful of brushes and the pot of paint over to Kaz, a hesitant sort of pride on his face. "All right, go for it, kid." Kaz picked up his right shoulder guard, turning it over in his hands a few times before setting it down in front of him. Grabbing a half-inch brush, he dipped it lightly in the paint, wiping the excess on the edge of the jar like he'd seen Cody do, then hovered it over the intimidatingly blank piece of armor he'd chosen to work on first. He went to touch the tip of the brush to the plastoid, then stopped, looking sheepishly up at Obi-Wan. Master? Could I borrow yours for reference so I don't mess it up?" Obi-Wan chuckled and pulled his own left pauldron off, sliding it across the table to Kaz. "There you are, Padawan." "Thanks." With a look of intense concentration on his face, bottom lip between his teeth, Kaz slowly and painstakingly recreated the symbol of the Jedi Order on his pauldron in 2/12 gold. Setting the finished product down on the desk, Kaz crossed his arms, paintbrush pointed away and out into the air, and considered his hard work with a critical eye. For not having picked up a brush before, his lines were clean, not jagged, and he had the thought that perhaps the Force had helped him, steadying his nervous fingers. "Not bad, kid," Cody said, picking up the pauldron to give it a close-up once over, eyes gleaming with a pleased light. He set it down on the desk when he was done, smiling at Kaz. "You got a nice, even coat on it. That'll take about 2 hours to dry, so don't try to put it on yet. Does that paint need any kind of sealant or protectant?" Obi-Wan asked, craning his head to get a better look at Kaz's hard work. "No, because the way it bonds to the plastoid," Cody answered easily. He shrugged ruefully at Obi-Wan. "One!" The Kaminoans didn't want something that would cause extra expense or use a lot of materials. Not cost-effective. "Ah," Obi-Wan muttered, keeping his own counsel on the matter, arms flexing briefly where they were crossed over his chest. He looked over at Kaz, not wanting to bring down the mood. "All right, Kaz, what's next?" Kaz froze, young mind going blank as he stared down at the stark white armor assembled on the tabletop. "I have no idea." "Well," Obi-Wan began, expression turning sly, "you borrowed something from me. Perhaps the good commander could provide you with some inspiration." This caused Cody to choke on air, eyes going impossibly round and brows shooting up to his hairline, one hand coming up to cover his mouth as he coughed, the other spasming on the tabletop. Obi-Wan took that moment to gloat silently in his head, confirming his theory that Jango Fett had in fact passed on some of the intricacies of his culture to Cody at the very least, and perhaps some of the older batches as well. "Oh, hey, that's a good idea," Kaz exclaimed, at first oblivious to Cody's plight, then frowning at the commander when he started coughing. "You okay, Cody?" "Yeah," Cody grated out, trying to stifle the tickle in his throat and stop his coughing on nothing. He glared at Obi-Wan, pressing an indignant sense of, "Why are you like this down there, Bond?" causing Obi-Wan to grin cheekily at him. Cody's glare intensified, then he rolled his eyes and turned back to Kaz. "Yeah, I'm fine. You can use whatever you like from my pattern, Kaz. If you want, that is." Kaz's expression brightened, and he reached for his helmet, passing back his master's pauldron as he did. Hands on either side of the helmet, he sat it down in front of himself, the brim pointed towards his stomach, and considered it. His eyes wandered over to Cody's helmet, which was sitting neatly next to the commander's DC-50AA. On the sun visor, there were small geometrical lines. A smile made its way to Kaz's lips, and he reached eagerly for the brush, dipping it into the paint and then setting to work. Across the top of the helmet, he painted 2 vertical gold stripes that stopped at the brim, then carefully recreated the angular pattern on Cody's visor on the brim of his own helmet in golden paint. Appraising it for a moment, he nodded, satisfied, then spun the helmet around for his master and the commander to inspect. "Now, that does look familiar," Obi-Wan said teasingly, eyebrow raised in Cody's direction. Cody could feel a blush trying to work its way onto his face, crawling up from his chest and neck, and fought it back for all he was worth. A small, shy smile tugged at his lips as he looked down at the helmet sitting innocently in the middle of the table. There was no way Kaz knew what it meant to copy the pattern of his armor, but Cody knew, and so apparently did Obi-Wan. Because of course, his criminally curious general seemed to know everything, and was not at all shy about letting Cody know about it. "I like it," Cody said, voice hitching slightly. He cleared his throat and smiled over to a nervously shifting Kaz. "Good choice, kid." Kaz's eyes narrowed, and his head cocked to the side in the way that it did when he was analyzing something and reaching out to the Force to help him work it out. "That means more than just painting a cool pattern." "Did I do something I wasn't supposed to?" No, you didn't," Cody hastened to assure him. He gulped, barely checking the urge to fidget and feeling sweat start to gather under his blacks. But you're right. It does mean something. Drawing in a deep breath, he squared his shoulders and looked Kaz in the eye, fighting to keep his force presence from doing that spiky thing it did when he was uncomfortable. Clans and aliens share patterns and symbols, and if they haven't, a crest. A slow, pleased grin started to stretch out on Kaz's face as the realization set in. Oh, wow. And you let me use some of yours? Does that mean we're elite? That, Kaz, is exactly what it means, Obi-Wan answered, coming to Cody's rescue as the commander looked rather overcome at the moment. His arms dropped from where they were crossed over his chest and he picked up Kaz's helmet, admiring it up close. He set it down and gave Kaz a solemn look. There's a phrase in Mandua, Aliat Orisha Taladin. Family is more than blood. Ah, Lit Orisha Wataldin? Kaz tried to sound the words out carefully, committing them to memory. Aliat Orisha Talidin, Cody repeated softly, eyes fixed down at his hands resting on the table, lost in his own memories. The last time he'd heard that phrase he'd been barely older than Kaz and it had meant the world to him. Now it dredged up fond yet bitter memories of Fett, how the man hadn't lived up to that and abandoned him for Boba, leaving him to rot with the rest of his brothers. Shoving those memories aside, Cody resolved to make new ones, better ones, with Kaz and Obi-Wan, and be better than the man and the system that had raised him. He would be good to Kaz and Obi-Wan. He wouldn't leave them like he was left. Cody, are you all right? Obi-Wan's hand on Cody's shoulder knocked the commander out of his thoughts. Yes, sorry, General. Cody shook himself, eyes conveying his gratitude, and smiled back at Kaz. You have the right to put that pattern, and anything else of mine, on your armor. Just like you have the right to put the Jedi symbol there, too. Kaz's grin was like a mini-sun, his eyes sparkling in happiness. He looked from Cody to Obi-Wan like he couldn't believe his luck, then set his helmet aside and snapped up his cuirass, hauling it into his workspace. He dipped the brush in the paint, then looked up at his master in question, brush hovering over the white plastoid. How do you spell that? Ah, here, Obi-Wan said, immediately understanding Kaz's intentions while Cody looked at them both in confusion. Obi-Wan pulled out his comm unit, typing the phrase into the display and passing it to Kaz. That should help. Oh yeah, thanks, Master. Kaz took it carefully, setting it down by his left elbow for reference, and set to work. As he went, it dawned on Cody what the cadet was doing. In a pattern of the sunburst on his own chest plate, Kaz was painting the words from the Mandoa phrase, arranging each one like a sun ray, the placement exactly where they were on Cody's own armor, but instead of being a solid stripe, Kaz's were made of Arabesh letters spelling out Mandoa. Cody felt like there was a certain kind of symmetry in that. The Voda may claim Mandoa as theirs, but they didn't use the characters to write in, instead using Galactic Basic like the rest of the Republic. Kaz, odd mishmash of cultures that he was, distilled all those disparate pieces together and put them right on the front of his chest plate for the whole galaxy to see and marvel at. When he was done, Kaz looked back up at them, brush set down on the table and hands on his hips. What do you think? I think that's quite marvelous, don't you, Cody? Cody swallowed around the lump that was trying to lodge itself in his throat. Jate Bora, Kazika, Kaz beamed up at them. Foray! Without wasting a moment, Kaz went back to painting, the rest of his armor pieces going quickly. Kaz settled easily into the Force as he worked, pulling on it for inspiration and letting it guide his hands. He put the solid upside-down triangle of the 2/12 on the top of his back plate like the rest of the battalion, a stylized Orabesh V, on the opposite pauldron, and then on both his vambraces and thigh plates the cadet simply painted twin vertical stripes running down the length of the pieces in the center, similar to Rex's lone stripe of blue down the arms of his own gear. Throughout it all, Cody felt like he was going to spin out of control. He hadn't been ready for the emotional speeder chase that painting Kaz's armor had turned into. The cadet himself was buzzing about happily, content and warm in the Force, his engine glow presence a soothing balm along Cody's own ragged one. He could feel the general reaching out, trying to offer comfort, and instead of ignoring it, Cody embraced it, letting the feeling of calm reassurance wash over him, knitting together the frayed edges of his Force signature. He gave the general a grateful smile that was returned in kind just as Kaz put the last brushstroke on his armor. There! Kaz exclaimed, leaning back from the table, setting down the brush and crossing his arms over his chest. I'm done. What do you think? Looks good, Kaz, Cody said, appraising the pieces carefully, imagining how they would look when Kaz wore them for the first time. That'll look great when it's all together. I agree, Obi-Wan said, leaning forward, one hand on his chin, the other braced on the edge of the desk. That chest plate in particular is a work of art. And on that other pauldron, is that a V for Vode? Yup, Kaz said with a nod. Obi-Wan smiled at his apprentice, settling back on his side of the table again. Good job, Padawan. Kaz beamed at them. Thanks. Cody looked up at the clock on the wall by his fresher and felt his eyebrows jump. They've been at this for most of the morning. Well, that has to dry for a few hours, kid. It's about time for mid-meal. Why don't we head down to the mess hall? Kaz laughed as his stomach growled pretty much on cue. Yep. I think that'd be good. Worked up quite the appetite, didn't you? Obi-Wan said as they made their way out of Cody's quarters, Kaz leading the charge. Penning is hard work, sir. Cody's voice was teasing, his manner easy and relaxed as they made their way towards the lift that would take them to the level the mess was on. Ah, yes, how could I forget? Food first, teasing later, Kaz declared as they stepped into the lift. Cody and Obi-Wan shared a grin and stepped in with him. Cody turned to Obi-Wan, eyeing him over Kaz's head. Helix is going to lose his mind when he sees the kid's armor for the first time. Now there's a thought, Obi-Wan said thoughtfully, crossing his arms and letting the fingers of his left hand play with his beard. He gave Kaz a look. How about it, Padawan? Are you up for teasing Helix? Kaz smirked up at them both, mischief making his amber eyes gleam. Totally, Obi-Wan laughed, delighted. Perfect. For the next month and a half, the Negotiator and the 212th Attack Battalion, along with the 7th Sky Corps, were tasked with protecting their newly acquired supply lines in the Outer Rim. To Obi-Wan's dismay, he was not able to arrange to slip away and take Kaz to Ilum, so they simply made do by training with his practice saber and having Cody drill them both together in Mandalorian fighting forms. Cody had finally been able to make good on his promise, and Obi-Wan was delighted to discover that he himself had much to learn from his commander. Cody was an excellent teacher, just as Obi-Wan had suspected he would be. The commander was patient, competent, and was able to clearly communicate concepts and demonstrate them effectively for his two students. Kaz was thriving under both their combined tutelage, and because they were all firmly stuck aboard the ship, he had plenty of time to catch up on the Jedi lessons he missed by virtue of not growing up in the temple. Kaz showed an aptitude for art and writing, but was utterly uninterested in math and astronavigation, preferring to learn about current events, cultural practices of different species and their histories. He tolerated politics much better than Anakin did, and due to his close ties to the living force, was picking up on negotiation and mediation without issue. Kaz was utterly ambivalent about flying, not caring one way or the other about it, but practically threw himself into the art of meditation like it was an obsession. He worked on it enough in the last month that he could almost rival Obi-Wan for time spent meditating in one sitting. Obi-Wan felt like the cadet almost enjoyed that more than he did practicing lightsaber katas, which frankly astounded Obi-Wan. Cody was equally baffled by this, both of them vividly remembering Anakin's legendary hatred for all things sitting still. Cody, at least, felt some solidarity with the cadet when it was revealed. Kaz was just as bad at slicing as Cody was, commiserating over it any time Kaz had a lesson involving that or mechanics. Kaz was not a mechanic. While he could easily perform the basic maintenance required of all troopers, he did not enjoy working on machines like Anakin did. He tolerated it as needed to repair armor and weapons, but after that his attention tended to wander. Obi-Wan and Cody had plenty of work day to day to keep them occupied on the ship's bridge, and had a daily meeting with all the section chiefs to keep appraised of the general goings-on related to shipboard life. So far, they'd only had a few minor skirmishes with enemy ships, nothing to indicate a full-scale investment by the Separatists just yet, but Obi-Wan could sense in the Force that something was most certainly on its way. The Jedi High Council agreed with him. Kaz's apprenticeship continued to be a source of happiness for Obi-Wan, and he was able to indulge in his love for teaching with yet another eager student. Anakin had been a brilliant Padawan, and an excellent apprentice when he'd put his mind to it. Teaching him had been one of the highlights of Obi-Wan's life, despite the tragedy that brought them together. Teaching Kaz was shaping up to be the same, and Obi-Wan gladly put all of himself into the task. There had been a minor dust-up over Kaz himself between the Kaminoans and the Jedi Council, which had been fueled by the Kaminoans having heard by a rumor mill about the Force-sensitive cadet and then summarily demanding him back for study. They had been stoutly and promptly refused by the Jedi, as Republic law and GAR regulations were firmly on their side. The moment Kaz became Obi-Wan's apprentice, he was no longer Kaminoan property, and instead a ward of the Order, and additionally he was permanently assigned as Obi-Wan's yeoman. These things combined had rendered Kamino unable to repatriate the cadet. The news that the Kaminoans wanted Kaz back had sent Cody straight into a protective fervor, and Obi-Wan had had to spend an hour talking Cody down from taking a shuttle straight to Tipica City and knocking skulls together. Once the news had made it around the ship, it seemed the entire 212th Attack Battalion was dead set on heading to their home world and giving the native inhabitants a piece of their mind. Obi-Wan firmly forbade such an action, and Kaz thought the whole thing highly entertaining, knowing there was no way in the 9 Corellian hells that either his master or Cody would let him be sent back there. Shaking his head slightly, Obi-Wan refocused on the view in front of him just as Cody and Kaz came through the doors of the lift to join him on the bridge. They had been called back to Coruscant for a confidential mission briefing that could only be attended in person due to security concerns. In a matter of moments, the negotiator was going to drop out of hyperspace and into Coruscant's orbit. Kaz was justifiably excited, and his rapid footsteps gave him away as he trotted over to where Obi-Wan was, watching the indigo and purple lights of faster-than-light travel through the transparisteel windows. "Oh, wizard. I didn't miss it," Kaz said, settling easily at Obi-Wan's side. His now painted armor was shined and polished, his DC-17 safely in its holster, and his training saber clipped to the opposite side of his belt. His new helmet and goggles were resting in their place of honor above his bunk in his quarters, unneeded while they were not fighting. "No, you're just in time," Obi-Wan said, gesturing towards the viewport. The ship gave its characteristic lurch, and they were all suddenly reverted to real space. Before them was Coruscant. Its vast, glowing networks of lines and buildings looked like an intricate web from space, the dark half of the planet glowing like a hot coal in the inky blackness of space. Obi-Wan heard Kaz's sharp intake of breath at the sight, and hid his smirk in his beard. "Whoa," Kaz breathed. Suddenly he winced. "Oh, there are a lot of life forms down there. Deep breath, kid." Cody placed a hand on Kaz's shoulder, steadying the cadet. "Close the hatch if you need to. You'll be fine." Kaz did as instructed, chest expanding and contracting with his breathing, his presence in the Force dimming slightly. "That's better." Obi-Wan watched them both, bemused. "One would think you're his master, Cody." Cody chuckled. "Hardly, sir, but I do pay attention when you teach him. I am aware." Obi-Wan's smirk turned into a smile. He patted Cody's shoulder and then turned to the bridge officers behind him. "Take us in, Hap." "Yes, sir," Hap answered with a sharp nod, turning to his crew to make sure the orders were carried out. The glowing latticework sphere of Coruscant grew steadily larger as they approached. Kaz got as close to the window as he could, leaning on the closest workstation, careful to stay out of the way of the brothers working diligently around him. By now, the entire crew was used to the curious cadet, and Kaz was adept at being unobtrusive as he watched. Kaz, as it happened, had quite a talent for stealth, as he had proven the day they had met on Kamino by sneaking past nearly the entire city without being detected until the last second. So far, Kaz had not used this power to get away with mischief, but both Obi-Wan and Cody knew that day would certainly come. They were not looking forward to it. In front of them, the ship breached the atmosphere, clouds flying by and the light amber glow of friction on the ship's shields cast a hue over the viewport. Kaz tried to lean even closer, hips pressed on the console and nose nearly touching the transparisteel. Cody and Obi-Wan shared a wry look, and Cody rolled his eyes, head shaking as he turned back to watch Kaz as the cadet tried to lean through the viewport window. The Padawan was a hair's breadth away from putting a knee up onto the console to climb closer. Cody saw his legs start to twitch, right foot picking up from the floor, and decided it was time to intervene. "Don't climb on that console, kid." Kaz jerked, whipping around to look at Cody like he was crazy, only to glance down and realize just how much of his small body he'd managed to plaster along the workstation. He laughed. "Oh, whoops." He looked over at the soft-shell officer at the station next to him and gave the man a sheepish shrug. "I didn't realize I'd nearly climbed on it, sorry." "Am I in your way?" "No, you're fine." The officer just smiled and shook his head, going back to his work with barely an interruption. Kaz gave the city in front of him his full attention again, dipping carefully into the Force. When they'd first come out of lightspeed, the sheer magnitude of the population on the planet had nearly bowled him over, but he'd gotten much better at controlling that with all the meditation he had been doing. Now, he wanted to test that control, as he'd never encountered this many people at once in his life. Neither Christophsis, Tatooine, or Kamino were as heavily populated as Coruscant, and Kaz was incurably curious, much like his master. He could feel the utter volume of living beings on the planet, and the neutron star beacon that was the Jedi temple at the center of it. Even this far out, he could sense them all, their power and light overwhelming. Carefully, Kaz pulled his mental shield door closed a little, imagining himself huddled in the escape pod watching everything easily pass him by, and he relaxed. Steadily, the city became more than just an indistinct blob on the horizon, and Kaz was able to make out individual buildings and the small bug-like dots that were the speeders and ships that flew around the giant city planet. They swooped in lower, and Kaz was able to spot the great dome of the Senate building, and they circled it, heading for the Grand Army of the Republic shipyards that were a quick speeder ride from 500 Republica. Skillfully, the pilots and bridge officers got the ship docked, landing procedures happening around Kaz in a cacophony of sound. He pushed away from his chosen vantage point and wandered back over to Master Obi-Wan and Cody, both of whom had been watching him with twin fond expressions, trusting Hap to marshal the crew to safely land the ship without interference from either of them. "Well, are you ready to see the temple?" Obi-Wan asked as Kaz stopped in front of him. Kaz nodded, blowing out a breath and trying to control his nerves. He wanted to see it, but he would admit to a certain amount of trepidation. His master might have accepted him as a Jedi, but what if the others didn't? "Yes, master." "Relax," Cody said, hands squeezing the back of Kaz's neck in comfort. "It'll be fine, kid. I promise. Yes, as soon as we get out of the briefing, I will take the both of you on a tour. And then stop by the quartermaster's shop to get you some Jedi tunics, Kaz. If you would like some," Obi-Wan said, guiding them towards the lift with a brief acknowledging nod and hand signal to Hap. "Oh, yeah. I almost forgot about that. Yes, I'd like some real Jedi clothes, Master," Kaz said quickly as they stepped into the lift. "I really want to see the Room of 1,000 Fountains, too," Kaz said eagerly, his nerves pushed aside in the face of exploration. "And the training stalls, and maybe the council room. Are we allowed up there?" This caused Obi-Wan to laugh as the lift doors closed in front of them. "I should hope so. I'm on the council after all." "Oh, yeah," Kaz rubbed sheepishly at the back of his head. "There, see?" Cody nudged Kaz on the shoulder with his elbow. "The General has an all-access pass. And besides, you're a Jedi now. It's your temple, too." "I don't know," Kaz said carefully as they exited the lift into the hangar bay. Already, the large ramp was lowered, allowing the ship's residents to come and go freely. "I don't really feel like a Jedi yet. That's quite normal," Obi-Wan answered, walking with them down the ramp towards the landing pad. "You've been training with me for less time than you were to be a trooper. That feeling will fade in time, Kaz. And I'm sure being able to swap out your armor when you want for Jedi tunics will only help you." Kaz nodded and went to respond, only to lose his train of thought as he stepped out onto Coruscant for the first time. His jaw dropped as he walked, head swiveling around madly, trying to take in every single thing all at once. As they cleared the shadow of the negotiator, suddenly Kaz felt like the world had opened to him. All around him was a flurry of activity, LAATs flying, speeders buzzing, troopers shouting orders, people walking, the wisps of clouds touching towering spires, and the pure peach of the sky above their heads. It was like stepping off the ship into a heavenly wonderland. "Whoa, it is very impressive," Obi-Wan agreed, hand on Kaz's shoulder blades, guiding his apprentice to make sure he didn't walk into anything in his wonder. "First time I was here, I wasn't sure it was real," Cody said with a laugh. "I'd never seen anything like it before." "Are you sure it's real?" Kaz asked reverently, eyes skittering over everything, jaw dropped, hands twitching at his sides. "Well, what does the Force tell you?" Obi-Wan said, turning the question into a quick lesson like he was wont to do. Kaz closed his eyes and focused, feeling carefully out with the Force. He grinned, opened his eyes, and looked back up at Obi-Wan. "It's real." "Of course." Meandering a little further, they left the landing area of the ships and came across a collection of the Coruscant Guard, their distinctive red paint and patterns giving them away. At the center of the group gathered around their gunship was Commander Fox, his arms crossed, helmet on, and gaze fixed right at them. Cody had the sinking feeling that this was their ride to the temple and that Fox had twisted someone's arm to make it that way. "Commander Cody," Fox said as they got within hearing range, "and General Kenobi. Welcome back to Coruscant, sirs. Are you our ride for the day, Commander?" Obi-Wan asked, tugging his outer robe around him and slipping his hands into the sleeves absently. "Yes, sir," Fox answered with a nod. His bucket turned, his visor pointed in Cody's direction. "So, Cody, what's this? I've been hearing about the 212th adopting a cadet?" Cody barely restrained the urge to sigh mightily. He gestured at Kaz. "Here he is, Fox. Fox, this is Kaz, the General's new Padawan. Kaz, this is Commander Fox of the Coruscant Guard. And my squad mate," Kaz grinned up at Fox, sticking out his hand for the other commander to shake. "Hi, nice to meet you." Fox's helmet shook and his vocoder gave a small, static-filled warble that indicated a chuckle. He grabbed Kaz's hand and shook it firmly a few times before letting go. "Nice to meet you, too." He turned his attention back to Cody. I wasn't sure he was real. Glad to know I was wrong. He motioned to the gunship behind them, its engine starting to spin up. We should get going. I hear you have a priority briefing waiting on you. Ah, yes, I'm afraid we're on a bit of a schedule, Obi-Wan said as they all clambered into the ship. Kaz, Cody, and Obi-Wan fell into their, by now, habitual positions, Kaz with an arm around Obi-Wan's waist, Obi-Wan's arm around his shoulders, and Cody's hand firmly gripping the back of Kaz's armor. Fox watched their well-oiled maneuvering impassively, but his force presence flared a little with his surprise. Lurching upwards, the ship took off, and Cody and Fox spent the ride catching up, talking about inconsequential things, like some of the current GA air gossip, Obi-Wan and Kaz chiming in when they had an opinion about it one way or the other. Some of it, predictably, revolved around the two of them. The ride over to the temple was quick as it was not a very far distance from the shipyards by design. The LAAT came in for a landing easily into the temple's hangar, setting down with its characteristic jolting thunk, and Cody, Obi-Wan, and Kaz hopped out, saying their goodbyes to Fox, who had wrangled a promise out of Cody to meet up later with Wolfie at 79's. Safely deposited in the hangar, Obi-Wan led them into the temple proper. As Obi-Wan and Cody crossed inside, Kaz paused by the doorway, looking in but not quite crossing the threshold. Obi-Wan and Cody turned around, looking at the cadet hovering in the doorway. Obi-Wan spoke, arms folded in his sleeves, one eyebrow raised a little in question. Kaz? Kaz took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. Pausing inside, he looked up and down the large hallway, taking in the pillars, the architecture, feeling out with the Force and sensing all the star-bright lights of the other Jedi around him. He'd never been near this many of them before, his experience limited to Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Master Yoda. Swallowing, Kaz walked up to his master and gave him a reassuring smile. I didn't know what it would be like, and I wanted to remember the moment. Sorry, I know we have a meeting. No, that's perfectly all right, Obi-Wan told him softly. How do you feel now? The Force here is, I can't even describe it. Like it's overstuffed, like a bag about to burst. So many all in one place, Kaz replied as they started walking. He looked over at Cody, who was on his right. What do you think, Cody? It's about the same since the last time I was here. Cody answered honestly. You know I can't feel all the things you can, Kaz. Oh yeah, I always forget that. Kaz laughed and shrugged, letting his hands rest on the tops of his utility pouches. He looked at Master Obi-Wan on his other side. How many Jedi are here right now, Master? Several thousand, Obi-Wan replied, guiding them through the large, winding halls of the temple towards the room that was picked for their meeting. Not every Jedi is out in the field commanding battalions. Some of them are entirely unsuited for that task and instead are better able to serve by staying here. Like soft-shell Jedi? Kaz asked, reaching for a comparable experience to help him understand. Exactly like that, yes, Obi-Wan said with a nod. Got it. Kaz's eyes went back to cataloging everything, filing away the information for later, instinctively tracking their route, keeping track of turns and landmarks, just like the commander next to him. There's a huge library here, isn't there? You mentioned it before. And the head archivist, Madam New, I think? Correct on both counts. Are there things other than books in the library? I think one of my lesson modules mentioned something called a holocrons, but it didn't explain what that was. Ah, yes. A holocron is a Jedi artifact used to store knowledge. Obi-Wan's hand slipped back into his sleeves as he spoke, voice taking on that professorial quality it did when explaining things. Jedi make them when they want something more than just the information itself to be passed along. Some holocrons even hold the remnants of the personalities of those that made them. Whoa, that's wizard, Kaz said. Suddenly, he frowned. Wait, if the Jedi can make them, does that mean the Sith can too? Obi-Wan winced. For him enough, and the greening mia distorosa yesem. A Sith holocron is an incredibly dangerous item. If you ever run across one, you'll know, and you must not interact with it in any capacity. That goes for both of you. Yes, Master. Kaz agreed readily, looking mildly frightened by the prospect. His encounter with Ventress still lingered in the back of his mind. Sure, General, Cody answered with a one-shouldered shrug, manner easy and unconcerned. I didn't have any plans to run into one. No one ever does, was Obi-Wan's ominous reply. Cody was stopped from asking the question on his lips by their arrival at the meeting room. Obi-Wan opened the door and led them in. They were some of the last to arrive, but there were still a few people missing. The majority of the Jedi Council and their assorted commanders were all arrayed around a large holotable in the center of the room, and unlike other meetings, those that were not able to be there in person were not attending via holocall. Soft, susurrus sounds of people talking filled the room, coupled with a general air of curious anticipation. Cody's eyes roved around the room, swiftly cataloging who was there and who was not. General Windu, General Yoda, General Tien, General Mundi, General Rancisis, General Fisto, General Kuhn, and General Koth. He could see Thrawn over by Yoda, Pon standing near Windu, Wolf with Kuhn, Captain Locke's steadfast presence by Koth, Bakara hovering near Mundi's shoulder, Monk across the room from them with Fisto, and Arrow with Tien. Cody noticed Wolf waving them down, and his own general, Plo Koon, was signaling them as well. "Looks like we've been saved a seat," Obi-Wan said with humor. Weaving through the crowd of troopers and Jedi, he gave out hellos when he received them, and stopped in front of Plo Koon. The two shared a brief bow, and then Obi-Wan spoke. "41, good to see you in person. The pleasure is all mine, Obi-Wan," Plo Koon graciously replied. His attention was immediately taken by Kaz. "And you must be Kaz. I see you've acquired some color since our last meeting." "Hello, Master Plo." Kaz bowed to him just like Master Obi-Wan had taught him, then grinned up at the kindly Keldor Master. "Yes, sir, I did. Cody helped me paint it." "Oh, boy," Wolfie said with a skeptical look. He squinted at the chest plate, then raised his brows in shock, looking from Kaz to Cody and back. "Whatever, all right then. You just went for it, Cody. It was entirely his idea," Cody defended himself, arms crossed over his chest. He motioned between Kaz and Wolf. "Kaz, this is Commander Wolf of the 104th Battalion, also one of my squad mates." "Wolf, this is Kaz. Sukui, Wolf." Kaz offered his hand to shake, and Wolfie did with a slightly incredulous expression. "Sukui, cadet," Wolfie answered, eyebrows nearly to his hairline and lips twist up in a half-smirk. "I did not know Commander Cody was a squad mate of yours, Wolfie," General Kuhn said, gazing at Wolf through his goggles, his voice giving away his interest. "Oh, yes, sir. I had to suffer through training with him," Wolf said with a teasing smirk at Cody. "You had to suffer?" Cody scoffed, playing along. "I think you've got that backwards. I had to suffer through training with you." Wolf rolled his eyes. "Not even." "True. Both of us had to suffer through Fox," Cody said with a slight snigger. He snapped his fingers, a thought occurring to him. "That reminds me. He demanded our presence tonight at 79's. "Can you make it?" "Oh yeah, he already forced me into it." Wolf sighed and rolled his eyes again. "If I'll be there." "You know if Bly or Pons are going to make it?" Cody scanned the room, spotting Pons over by General Windu. "Only one's, mate. He's over there. Bly's deployed still. I want to go to 79's, Kaz interjected, much to the amusement of their current gathering. "Aye." Obi-Wan paused, a denial on his lips, then looked over at Cody. His commander had a decidedly thoughtful expression on his face. They shared a glance, and Obi-Wan raised a questioning eyebrow at him. "Commander, what do you think?" Wolf's jaw dropped, brows rounding on his forehead, looking between Obi-Wan and Cody like he couldn't believe the commander was even being asked such a question. Next to him, Master Kuhn seemed to think the entire situation amusing, and his feelings floated out of him into the force around them pleasantly. "I mean, it would serve Fox right," Cody said after a bit of consideration. He crossed his arms and cocked his head, eyes locking with Obi-Wan's. "If you come with him, the kid can go, sir." "Yes." Kaz did a little hop and a fist pump. He turned large, round, sad Tuka eyes on Obi-Wan. "Please can we go, Master?" "Well, when Fox extorted your presence for tonight, Commander, I figured Kaz and I could go to Dex's and make a quick night of it ourselves," Obi-Wan answered slowly. He crossed his arms, fingers twitching on his biceps. He gave Wolf a deferential look. "I am honored, and I will accept so long as you don't mind, Commander Wolf." "I would not want to intrude." Wolf was still stewing in his own surprise, but managed an answer when Kaz's sad Tuka eyes were turned on him. "Please, cadet. Those eyes are a weapon." "Cody's right. It'll be perfect revenge against Fox. In that case, we would be glad to join you, Commander." Obi-Wan smiled pleasantly over at Cody. He looked over at Plo when a thought occurred. "Are you all right with that, Master Plo? Or, if you and your brothers are amendable, Cody, perhaps he could join us as well." Cody and Wolfa shared a quick glance and a hurried communication in hand sign, but before they could respond, Master Plo spoke. "Thank you for the invitation, but I sense that I shall be kept busy by the results of this meeting," Master Kuhn regretfully informed him. He turned his attention back to Wolf. "I will do my best to give you a few hours this evening, Commander. Do not worry." Wolfa wasn't sure if he wanted to be touched at his general's thoughtfulness, annoyed that he had to attend the gathering in the first place, or worried about whatever intel this meeting contained. He settled on neutral. "Thank you, sir." Cody laughed at him and opened his mouth to say something suitably sarcastic when the last holdout for the meeting scurried in. It was some underling nab born from the Intel division clutching a horde of datapads in their arms. Cody spared them hardly a glance, instead focusing on General Windu, who had done something in the Force that Cody felt to get all their attention. He was the first trooper to respond to it, the others following the cues from their generals. "Thank you all for coming," General Windu began. "I understand that this meeting was short notice and that some of you had to travel quite far to get here. The information discussed here is highly privileged and will only be shared on secure channels on a need-to-know basis." He waited, using the silence to let that sink in. Appeased, he motioned towards a Nat-born admiral who appeared at his side. "I'll hand it over to Gear Intelligence from here." The admiral in charge of Gear Intelligence climbed up on the small raised dais that General Windu had been using and cleared his throat. He was a Pantoran, his blue skin and white facial markings contrasting nicely with the gray of his Republic Navy uniform. His hair was trimmed regulation short, and he had a no-nonsense air about him that Cody immediately liked. "Yes, thank you, Master Windu." When he spoke, his voice was soothing, flowing easily in the accent of his people. "For those of you who do not know me, I am Admiral Dern Chiyo, head of GAR Intelligence." He pressed a button on the remote in his left hand, and a map appeared in the large holotable. Model ships fizzed into view. "In this last week, we've lost a fleet and several ships to an as-of-yet unidentified weapon. The attacks have been occurring along the same route, and we believe we can predict the next location with reasonable accuracy. Current chatter suggests the weapon that destroyed our ships is linked to the rumor of a new separatist flagship." The diagram in the center of the table changed from a log of the destroyed ships to an Intel-created depiction of the potential new flagship. If it was accurate, the ship itself would be utterly massive, nearly 3 times the size of their largest star destroyer. A truly grand undertaking. As you can see, if what we've managed to dig up is true, this ship is massive. A ship this size could withstand sustained fire from the main guns on our Venator-class star destroyers, and likely would not even notice an attack from our smaller starfighters. Gear Intelligence believes the confirmation, and, if possible, the destruction of this ship is of the utmost importance. And, if it is the vehicle used to ferry the new weapon responsible for the destruction of our warships, that makes this even more imperative. Admiral Chiyo paused, looking around the room and letting the information sink in. Predictably, General Kenobi had the first question. Admiral Chiyo acknowledged him with a wave of his hand. "Yes, General Kenobi. Where do you believe this ship is headed, Admiral?" Obi-Wan asked, voice ringing out clear and strong, hands in the sleeves of his outer robe. "We have reason to believe it will appear somewhere along the route to the Avogadro system," the Admiral answered confidently. "Judging from the locations of the previous attacks, the hyperlane that runs by the system is its current patrol route. The Bith system is near that route. This came from General Mundi. Skywalker and his new Padawan are there, securing that sector." "Perhaps we could send them to investigate?" "Unlikely," General Windu countered with a frown. "That system is too important to leave undefended, especially with this new threat in play. I'd rather send a different Jedi after it, one who currently doesn't have an assignment." "The 104th just cleared our most recent campaign," General Kuhn volunteered, his feeling from earlier becoming true. "I will lead the search for this new weapon." "I agree," Admiral Chiyo said in support of this. "It is my understanding that you are an accomplished pilot, General Kuhn." "Yes, I am," he answered honestly. "Then this mission would be a perfect use of your skills, sir," Admiral Chiyo said bluntly. "I suppose the rest of us are on the lookout, then," General Koth said into the lull. "If I run across anything, Master Kuhn, I will surely pass it on. Thank you, Master Koth." "Decided it is, then," Yoda said from his hover chair next to Commander Tyre. "Seek out this new weapon, Master Kuhn will. I will send you all the data Gear Intelligence has gathered, General Kuhn," the Admiral said with a strong nod. "Any thoughts as to what this mystery weapon might be?" Obi-Wan asked, ice blue eyes still fixed on the Admiral. "Unknown," Admiral Chiyo blew out a breath. "All we know is that our ships were completely destroyed and that they have not left survivors alive to tell about it. The only reason we even knew the ships went down was because their location beacons stopped transmitting. There's no evidence left over to determine how the ships were destroyed. I take it that the plans for the weapon were not included in the data our spies were able to steal?" This came from Master Mundi. "Unfortunately, that is the case." Chiyo brought both of his hands in front of himself and clasped them, bouncing just slightly on the balls of his feet. "We expect a protracted space battle in order to take them both down. It will not be easy. Then it is a good thing our best pilot has taken up this quest," Mundi agreed mildly. "Yes," Admiral Chiyo said bluntly. He cast an assessing gaze around the room. "Any further questions?" Silence greeted this pronouncement, and he nodded, stepping down from the dais as he spoke. Meeting adjourned. Bursting like a bubble, the attentive tension eased out of the room and quiet conversation resumed in its wake. Everyone who had immediate places to be and missions already assigned headed out shortly after, leaving General Windu, General Kenobi, and General Kun in the room with their commanders. All the others left, making plans, wishing each other friendly goodbyes. Over in the corner, Admiral Chio conferred further with his staff. Notify the Chancellor of this, I will, Yoda said to the small group left in the room, shuffling up to them with the aid of his Geimer stick. I will go with you if you are agreeable, Master Yoda, Master Kun said, walking to meet the diminutive master and his commander. If agreeable I am. Join me, Master Kenobi should as well.